We Saw a Thing is a movie podcast about remakes and sequels.
We saw a thing and talked about it.
This week, the guys watch Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
The following conversation has been edited for brevity.
It has been like insanely hot. It's, oh God, like it's just been awful in a way that, you know, only Toronto weather can give you.
Yeah, you guys are getting hammered there.
I guess it's okay. I guess people like this. There's people in this city who are very happy for the heat. I don't know those people.
Yeah, you're not one of them.
Those people are the fucking pod people.
They're the pod people.
That's who those people are. They're all emotionless and can deal with the heat. I'm not a pod person. And I can't, you know, my face is sweaty in full frame. That's me. And you can trust me because I am a small town doctor.
Oh my God. I really disliked that small town doctor for most of the movie because he was just walking around willy-nilly talking about everyone else's medical business and then just like aggressively hitting on that woman. And for most of the movie, it really didn't seem like she was that into it.
Well, I thought she was married. And then like the way he hit on her at the beginning, I was like, but wait, like, didn't they go separate ways and she's married? Yeah. And then as it turns out, I guess not.
I guess not. I didn't enjoy him, dude. I thought he sucked.
Well, you must have loved that he appeared and got hit by a car then.
Yes. That was pretty entertaining because it made me realize that the 70s version isn't a remake, it's a sequel.
It's a sequel. He's just been running around for the last 20 odd years.
Yeah, apparently the stress of the pod people and running around just made him super old and gray really quickly.
Well, I don't know if like this saying this is a way for you to tell me you did not enjoy these movies, because I enjoyed the hell out of both of these films. And I enjoyed them for different reasons.
I did enjoy both movies for different reasons. I enjoyed the 50s version a lot more than I enjoyed the 70s version. I actively hated the ending of the 70s version. I also really didn't like the ending of the first one either.
I saw the 70s version a couple of years ago and fell in love with the film. I love the effects. I love that you didn't know it was an us versus them. You don't know who to trust. I had never seen the 50s version until we watched it now, and I love the 50s version.
It's super good in the same way that I enjoyed the original Village of the Damned. There wasn't a ton of character development. The characters didn't really matter so much. It was very plot-driven. But the black and white also, like we keep friggin' talking about, really upped the ante as far as the tension of the film went. I didn't find that the 70s version was as tense or claustrophobic feeling. But I also felt like the change in the size of the town in the original, which was a very small town, everybody knew each other. So when everyone gathered in the town center to kind of take those pods away, that was like a very like creepy moment. And it didn't land the same for me in the 70s version because it's just like this big city anonymity. And I felt like that really took away from what was so investing in the original story.
I agree with you. I think that the small town feel of Santa Mira had more of a direct impact on its citizens, whereas this big city, it just felt a little bit more like, are they among them or are they not? Until the ending where you see the factory and it's like all of this production has gone into this. That freaked me out. Not to mention that the woman who I guess is not a love interest, but sort of feels like one, she melts in his hands. There was an urgency there that I also felt in the original, but it felt even more sinister because of the special effects.
Yeah, especially the scene where Donald Sutherland is sleeping on that roof and all the bodies are growing beside him. That scene was like really extended and it didn't need to be and very gross.
But it was very gross, but I loved it.
Yes, I did love the addition of like the little like hair feathery tentacle things that would come out and like attach themselves to people. I thought that was a really great use of added practical practical effects to just sort of increase the creepy factor, and that was incredibly effective. Like, the special effects, for the most part, really held up, especially at the beginning when they had the little tentacles coming out on the leaves that were all covered in water.
On the leaves.
That looked awesome.
It was so cool. Yeah.
I don't know. There was a lot to like in both movies.
I agree.
Although, I have to talk to you about the ending of the 50s version.
Okay.
Because I've realized I have a bit of a pet peeve with that kind of ending, but it also made me realize that there's endings to movies that are kind of similar that I really, really enjoy. Like, they get me jazzed up. And it's movies that end like A Quiet Place, John Wick 2, 10 Cloverfield Lane, even Angel, the last ending of their final season, where everyone's like geared up and they're ready to go battle. And the end of A Quiet Place, where Emily Blunt is like, you know, loading a shotgun and she's ready to go out and kick some ass. And even 10 Cloverfield Lane, where she sits at that intersection and then goes towards the alien attack instead of away from it. And those endings get me so jazzed because it means that there's more story there. There's more for our hero to accomplish, and they've grown and they've learned something. And to have this doctor at the end of the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers just kind of like sitting there like this like husk, and he's just been like so abused and withered by the end, and he's just hysterical, and everyone around him is gearing up for a big thing. It reminded me more of like Dawn of the Dead than it did something like 10 Cloverfield Lane, where the hero actually like learns something and grows. Like he felt like he shrank at the end. And I've realized that I prefer endings where my hero is like gearing up for war.
So to look at the 1956 version and see that ending, that it just kind of was like, the cavalry is here, end credits.
Yeah, it just kind of sits.
Yeah, it just kind of sits, which is kind of why I lean towards that 70s ending where Donald Sutherland opens his mouth all creepy and that high-pitched sound comes out. I'm like, no! And you just feel for Nancy, and I just don't want him to be a pod person.
Yeah. Here's an interesting thing. So I watched both of these movies with my nephews, and I watched the 70s version with my dad last night, and he really loves that movie. And it ended, and he goes, "So, what do you think? Way better ending than the 50s version, right?" And I went, I didn't like it. I didn't like that he was a pod person. And my dad has a theory that he isn't a pod person, that he's pretending to be a pod person, and he was willing to sacrifice Nancy so that he could continue to be a human living amongst the pod people. And I thought that was fascinating.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's super interesting.
But then why rat out Nancy?
I don't know, because I guess he's a bit of an a-hole. I have no idea.
Like a giant a-hole.
They like fully ditch Nancy, right? Like they find her in the hallway and they don't tell her that her husband is turned into a pod person, and then they go outside and they stand in line to get pods and then immediately ditch her. Like, they were not kind to Nancy at any point in this film.
You know what else they're not kind to is dogs.
Yes.
Not kind to dogs in these movies. In one, she freaks out because a dog runs into the street, and then in the 70s, it's got a human head.
Okay, was it wearing a mask for some reason, or did this dog actually have a human face?
It had a human face, man.
What kind of Hunger Games bullshit was that? What? That was crazy.
It was there to go, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Why, though? Why? They already made the pod people scream like friggin' velociraptors, which made no goddamn sense whatsoever, and really took me out of the film. Like, but what, seriously, with the dog? That was so weird.
Well, I think a lot of Philip Kaufman's film is, look what we can do with effects today.
Right.
And if we don't have films like that, we don't get John Carpenter's The Thing.
Right.
It's a gateway into effects. And also, you know, it's a 1970s version, so we can up the ante because the 50s version is so quaint.
Right. Okay.
So we're gonna show you something that you're gonna go, what in God's name?
But now that was an interesting difference between the 70s and the 50s. In the 70s, it really seemed like Elizabeth was going to be the main character.
We follow her the whole story.
Until all of a sudden Donald Sutherland is the main character, which really bugged me. But also, the actress who plays Elizabeth really looks like she could be Parker Posey's mom, and that really threw me off for a bunch too.
I kept thinking it was the woman from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, yes.
Karen Allen. I kept on thinking it was Karen Allen.
Good call.
We get Leonard Nimoy. We get Jeff Goldblum in this film. And then there's Donald Sutherland. And I'm like, man, they got some like heavy hitters. But at that time, were they? Nimoy was definitely Spock, but he wasn't doing a lot of movies.
He was a nice addition to the cast because, like, he had that very, like, calming, like, this is what's happening, I'm smarter than everyone in the room kind of vibe to him. So even when he turned into a pod person, you didn't notice right away. I did really appreciate that about him. There was some weird irony because the movie that always sticks out in my mind for Jeff Goldblum is Independence Day. And so when he's talking about, you know, aliens coming in big ships and stuff, like, it just made me laugh every time he opened his mouth about aliens.
Well, I hate to, so I hate to go down the history route, but I really want to. And yes, I really want to talk about Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1956 and what the climate is in the U.S. So here's a horror film that comes out during the McCarthy days. And who's a communist? And to put this film in theaters where all these people are, you don't know, there's something different about them, but you don't know what it is kind of a genius idea for a film and for a book, because it started as a book, in this period where there isn't a lot of trust. The government is actively seeking out communists. The war is over, so you have this very pleasant, everything's at peace, but there's still that unrest.
It's a situation where people are looking around with suspicion. So, like, what an amazingly timely movie to come out in that era.
Exactly. Absolutely. And then you get the 70s version, which I read came out like a week or a month after the Jonestown cult suicide. I know that the papers ran with that as a marketing gimmick of there are outsiders among you and they're not like you, and where the pod people were cults or cultists, I suppose.
The 70s version was weird because it escalated differently than the 50s version. Like, the first hour of it, I was like, okay, like, it's got this very plotting, like, menacing tone. And the second half of it didn't really have that same feeling to it. Like, I didn't enjoy that Donald Sutherland went on attack mode in that. What is he trying to accomplish? If they're growing pods like, you know, some giant high-scale grow-op, then, like, they're doing it in other places, too. His motivations didn't make a ton of sense to me.
I think he was just, like, full-on fear, like, we gotta take them down. And then at the end, watching all the schoolboys going into the building, and he's like, what the shit? Like,
but that's why my dad's theory about still being a human and pretending to be a pod person, I found very compelling.
Right.
I couldn't find any proof about that whatsoever. Like, you know, I read a couple interviews with Philip Kaufman where he was talking about, no, we wanted him to be a pod person. We wanted that to be like a big reveal. Like, they didn't even tell the producers that they were doing that. They filmed it just with Donald Sutherland, the writer, and Philip Kaufman. That was it. There was nobody else around. So nobody knew that was going to be the ending until apparently they screened it for producers at George Lucas's house.
Oh, amazing.
And everyone was very surprised by the ending, which is like a really cool thing. They didn't even really think about, you know, it's not this like Chris Nolan Inception, does the top fall over or not moment.
Yeah.
That he was just meant to be a pod person. But I love my dad's theory way more.
Oh, your dad's theory is awesome. In the zeitgeist of horror, I will let you know that the 70s version is the superior version in the horror community.
Interesting.
I genuinely thought that might be the case going in, but I like them both equally, I think. And I really enjoyed my time with the 50s version.
Me too. And interestingly, my 14-year-old nephews also really enjoyed the 50s version. They, in fact, preferred it to the 70s version.
All right. Well, like, can you just tell us about that? Like, I love that you're watching these old movies with your nephews.
Yeah.
What are they thinking watching this film from 1956?
They didn't have a lot to say, but they were very invested. Like, they have a tendency to talk through movies sometimes, and by the second half of the 50s version, like, they were both sitting on the floor with their backs to the couch, and one of them, every time there was a reveal, would just throw his hands up in the air and just go, "What?" And like, they were so invested.
Oh, man.
They loved it. That. It was amazing. Honestly, it blew my mind. And I told them after that I think it's really cool that they're so interested in watching a black and white movie that's a little bit slow. Yeah, the movie's, an hour, 20 minutes long, but it doesn't move and there's not a ton of action.
Right. There's a lot of dialogue.
A ton of dialogue. And there's a lot of subplots, right? Like there's a lot of reading between the lines there.
Yeah, there's trust and mistrust.
Yeah, and so that's a lot for kids to digest and understand on the fly with a plot like that. And they not only followed it, they were really invested.
Now were they afraid?
No, because they watch horror movies all the time. It's they're totally their jam. So
I see.
It's so interesting you say that in the horror movie zeitgeist, in the 70s version is the superior horror movie. And we've watched more horror movies for this podcast than I've ever seen in my life, period.
Yep.
And we still haven't hit on one where I've been yeah, that was truly horrifying. I was scared. There are things where I'm conceptually, that's a really horrifying idea.
And I think that has a lot to do with there's not a lot of remakes and sequels that we're watching that are of genuinely terrifying stuff.
Right. Okay.
I can go down the rabbit hole.
Right.
If you want, we can watch The Exorcist and then watch The Exorcist beginning, and you can be at home in your flat and watch that if you want.
No,
but we
good.
just haven't done that.
No, I'm good. I'm good with that. I think I have misunderstood. You jerk. I think I've misunderstood what the horror genre means in a broader sense. I would just assume that all horror movies were like The Exorcist and not something I would want to watch. But if you're talking about things like Village of the Damned and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I'm kind of digging these movies, and I didn't think that was going to be the case because I just avoid horror movies as a genre.
Right. And honestly, if we're being serious, this is probably more sci-fi leaning.
That makes sense.
It's aliens from another planet or pod people, and the special effects are really what's on display. But it definitely has creep factor to it. When you're watching the 56 version and he's in full frame close-up, there is genuine terror in his eyes.
Yeah, I will say I enjoyed the acting in both movies.
I mean, great acting. He's running down the hill, and the overture is, I've never been afraid like that before. I've never felt fear until that moment.
Now, that was something that the nephews pointed out as really enjoying was the narration. They thought that was really effective.
Really?
Yeah, they loved it.
And normally we're that's a cop-out.
Yeah, normally. But in that context, I kind of enjoyed it because he was definitely the main character and he was providing some insight, but also because we saw him in that panic mode at the beginning and then he's telling the story, it's a little bit more like the narration we got in Iron Man 3, right? Where he's talking to Banner the whole time and we don't know that till the end.
Yeah.
Where that kind of narration is fine with me.
I did not mind the narration at all. And I also felt it was perfectly fine that it wasn't there in the 70s version.
Well, especially since they shifted main characters halfway through, right? Elizabeth seemed to be meant to be the main character until easily middle or 2/3 of the way through the movie when Donald Sutherland took over. So to have it narrated and then have that shift like that would have been very weird.
Very interesting. There's also a film by Don Siegel who did the 56 version called The Killers, and I'm pretty certain there's an Ashton Kutcher remake of The Killers.
Should we add it to the list?
I don't want to add it to the list.
I don't want another Ashton Kutcher movie on our list.
Yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it. But he's got a great record on him. He's got Dirty Harry, Escape from Alcatraz, a bunch of Clint Eastwood movies. So he's definitely in the zone with action and moving a story around quickly, I guess.
I was interested to know that there are 2 more remakes of these movies.
There are.
There was a remake in 93 called Body Snatchers and a remake in 2007 called The Invasion with Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman. And apparently Warner Brothers is working on another remake of it right now.
Wow. Okay. So I knew about these extras before we started.
I didn't, yeah.
Because it was Body Snatchers and then The Invasion, and they weren't the plots didn't seem like they were as close as Invasion to Invasion. They're not outright in this plot saying they're pod people. They're not saying it's a small town. I was just let's hold off. Now, maybe we should look at that another time. I think we watched the right ones because those other ones did also nothing on the critics.
Gotcha. Well, that's good to know. I may watch the Daniel Craig version at some point.
And then we have Philip Kaufman, who I recently bought one of his films, but I haven't actually watched it yet. And it's The Right Stuff, a really long film about one of the first space launches, one of the Apollo launches. And it's supposed to be incredible. So I've got that to look forward to. He also did Quills, which is awesome, but also like really horny. Like it's basically about a poet who's in prison, who gets his writing out, and all of his writing is like smut. And he gets all of his writing out through Kate Winslet, who is totally horny for the writing, but he's really horny for her. It's weird. It's good, but it's like real horny. I know I've said that word now.
Like easily a dozen times, yeah.
But it is. It is.
Well, this is the only Philip Kaufman movie I've seen, and it didn't make me want to like travel down a rabbit hole like other directors we've watched for this podcast have. It was fine. It was fine.
It's just nice that these directors went on and did more stuff, and you know, his career didn't end with Invasion. Although I will say that the film popularity on Letterboxd, this is his most popular film.
Sometimes you say these things and then I don't understand why.
The film community is strange. It's a little bit bizarre. It's got a long history of hyping things and maybe not hyping the right things.
Sometimes you're like, I don't know, this is like a classic and like film Twitter loves it. I'm like, well, why?
Yeah, I honestly, sometimes it's just like, I don't know. I don't know why. Like film Twitter went crazy for Joker, but it was crazy half. Half loved, half hate. So sometimes it just gets like brought up in the craziness of film lovers loving films. And you gotta like actually look at the conversation, see why it's that way.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, that's the great thing about art and movies is that the things that you enjoy can be different from the things I enjoy, and we can still be passionate about movies. That's a nice thing.
It is a nice thing.
It's a nice thing, Jay.
In conclusion, I love both of these films. I think they're both nice things.
Next time on We Saw a Thing.
All right, another 3-movie episode coming up next week as we watch Friday, next Friday, and the Friday after next. Ice Cube and Chris Tucker. Let's go!
We Saw a Thing is hosted by Jay Kennedy and Chris Shapcott. Produced by Shapcuts Media. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And check our show notes for links to our social media and credits. And leave a review on Apple Podcasts.